much food to fall asleep. Today I'm presenting this work, but this is not my work. This is the work of Tracy Cooper, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. The reason I am helping with this is because I help with some of the analysis of the data. And for those of you who saw my presentation on highly sensitive and gifted people yesterday, you will recognize that the theme of the highly sensitive person is also represented in this presentation. And so before we go ahead too far, we're just going to look at what is exactly a highly sensitive person. And I would like to say that because it's Tracy's words, the slides are rather busy with the wording, so that I make sure I say what he wanted to say, but I'm not going to zoom past, so if you follow me, I will kind of walk you through the reads, through the text. So basically, a highly sensitive person is the layman's term to describe a kind of construct that is in research called sensory processing sensitivity. And it was coined by Elaine Aron in 1997. And it's a personality trait which is separate from introversion, shyness, emotionality, and neurosis. So she factored all of that out. So you can be highly sensitive and you don't need to be a shy person. You can be highly sensitive and you don't need to be neurotic. And that's the point I was trying to make this morning in the other session, that neurosis in the old day was associated with high sensitivity, and the two were used as synonyms, but now we know it's not the case. In her study, she says that about 15 to 20% of the population is highly sensitive, and this is both in both genders. So it's not like all the females are highly sensitive and the male aren't. It's not true. It's 50-50. It's just that for males in our society, it's often harder to kind of show it, maybe, and they might have more mechanisms to deal with that and hide it, maybe. We have now a number of functional MRI studies on highly sensitive people. There's 3 to date. The last one was by Bianca Acevedo from UC Santa Barbara, and it basically looks at brain activation, and basically the last one, Acevedo et al., looks at empathy, and the other 2 look at processing of stimulation. These are very interesting studies showing that there are some functional differences between highly sensitive people and the non-highly sensitive people who can be sensitive, they're just not highly sensitive, okay? And there's no judgment behind this term. It's not like the highly sensitive person is a better person than the person who's not highly sensitive, so that we are clear. And so... Do you have references to this? Do you have reference? Yep, I can give you later. Okay. So you keep coming through this in the literature that most gifted people are highly sensitive. Well, okay, we read that all the time, but I haven't seen data that is showing that very clearly. That's why I wanted to dig into it with my own little study. I haven't done that well enough yet, so if anyone wants to collaborate on something like this, I'd love to. But there's this general idea that most gifted people are highly sensitive, but it's not the case that all highly sensitive people are gifted. We're talking of different groups because highly sensitive is 20% of the population, and then the gifted, if you go by IQ, it's 2 point something. So you've got something that's not working with the numbers, unless we've got it completely wrong with the IQ, and that's a debate in itself. For today's purpose, we're going to say that these are 2 groups that maybe, in some cases, overlap. Right? Anyway, the highly sensitive person has got an acronym given by Elaine Aron, which is DAS. It stands for depth of processing. So in one of this fMRI study, you see that the information is kind of is worked on in a different way by highly sensitive people. It was visual information they were giving them in the scanner. Highly sensitive people have a tendency to be overstimulated in certain circumstances, although it's not a question of them having more sensitive eyes. It's the way the signal is processed that is different. And it could take any shape or form. A highly sensitive person, one will have really sensitivity to the light and will hate the light coming from the ceiling and would like to have only secondary lights in the home. The other one is going to have a high sensitivity to the clothes with the tag in their clothes, and I have to cut them absolutely, otherwise they cannot live. The other one's going to have the sock in the shoe. It's just sitting wrong. The seam is just kind of interfering with a good life. So you don't know how it's going to come through. But once you develop a sense for them, you start spotting them. And these people are characterized by a high level of empathy and high level of emotional responsiveness. And they're sensitive to subtle stimuli. So that's what Tracy is referring to here is in that fMRI. They were taking a greater amount of time spent to process a visual scene. They were given in that scanner, they were given, when you look at the newspaper and you've got spot the difference images. That's what they gave them, 2 images, and they had to spot the difference between them. Anyway, so that's what characterizes a highly sensitive person. So, Tracy, for his PhD, administered the Overexcitability Questionnaire into a study he was doing on highly sensitive persons and career, because he had a hunch that highly sensitive people may have different ways of approaching a career, that they might use their strength in some way, like empathy maybe, that they might have some obstacles in their career due to being highly sensitive. And so he was exploring that, and one of the things he did is give them the Overexcitability Questionnaire. So that's basically, that was all about exploring their work life. And he did that, so he gave the Overexcitability Questionnaire, that's one source of data. He gave them a self-completion questionnaire on a little scale about their work habits in the past and how things went. And then he asked them a bunch of open questions. So the 3 data sources that I'm going to report to from Tracy's data today. And so the Excitability Questionnaire 2 has been shown to be a reliable instrument. It's on the Likert scale, and it's never been done, as far as he knows, that this has been done specifically for highly sensitive people, and he had a good N. This is what we like to see. A whole bunch of people took part in this study, so a lot of strength probably in some of the states. English. And that flows nicely to the next point, which is the survey takers were recruited from dedicated social media and email lists of HSPs from Elaine Aron and Ted Zeff, who's also a known author in the highly sensitive theme. And they could come from different countries, but even if it wasn't their first language, they took the survey in English. The survey takers were asked to take the 27 HSP self-test, the research version of it. There's 2 versions of it. On the website, there's a yes and no answer for Mr. Everybody who wants to go and have a quick look if they're in that category or not. And then there's the Likert scale that's used for research. So they were asked to take that, and if they were not in the group of highly sensitive people, they were asked not to go on and take that for the survey. But we don't actually have their score of the highly sensitive survey, because they did that on their own. Here you can find the test if you're interested. This is the website of Elaine Aron, so whatever you read there comes from research. It's not just a fan website, it's the website of the researcher. And then we analyzed the Overexcitability survey as the manual says. And for the qualitative part, Tracy did a thematic analysis of the answers, and he was looking for dynamisms. And remember, that survey was not made with the dynamisms in mind. It was made about how is your work life in mind. So we kind of revisited his data in the light of dynamisms. So he went and read the input twice and was looking for dynamisms, and then he was matching the answer to a dynamism. And because it's really interpretive, I mean, you know, assigning a dynamism is tricky business, and we've got people here in the room who are trained and well-versed in doing this. We just had a go at it, and he had a go at it. So anybody in the room is allowed to disagree with what's going to come next. But a conservative approach was taken to not over-interpret the answer of a person and link it to a dynamism. If there was any doubt, no dynamism was assigned. So the quantitative results, in short, highly sensitive people have less psychomotor overexcitability than a standard, if there is such a thing, a standard person. I'm just giving you the gist now that I'm putting the table up. And then highly sensitive people have more imaginational, intellectual, sensual, and much more emotional overexcitability than your normal sample. And the sample is here, so the score, this is the published score of all the overexcitabilities from this dude there. And that's the actual Tracy Cooper's study. So if we go one by one, we see that the average psychomotors by 3.35, and highly sensitive people seems to score a little bit lower. Of course, when you start looking at the range, it looks the same, similar. And this is the standard deviation here. So if you add the standard deviation here to this figure, you don't get very far from this one, right? So I'm not telling you what to think of the data, but you can choose whether you find that really different or not so different. Potential, you've got 3.28 and 3.85. Imaginational, so there's more in that highly sensitive people on this one and this one. And also in the intellectual, you've got a bit more. And emotional, you got 1 point difference. So on the Likert scale, I suppose that's quite different, yeah. And yeah, so if you look at it, the same data in a different way, if the bars, the gray bars here are the score, the published score for a normal level of overexcitability, and the white column designates this study, Tracy's study. And the bars represent the standard deviation, and usually one rule of thumb is to say if the bars overlap between the two columns, you cannot really call that significantly different. So if you look at the bars of each category, you'll see they overlap. So in that sense, maybe you could say it's not significantly different. But there still are some differences between the published mean, which is in gray, and the study mean for highly sensitive people. So psychomotor seems to be lower, all the other ones seem to be higher. But if you go ahead and actually try to do this in a statistical way, and that each statistical test has a bunch of assumptions that are associated to the test. And in this case, the data did not fit the assumptions. And sometimes it's really bad that you run the test if the assumptions are not met. Sometimes, if you have a really big sample, like we have here, it's not too bad. Anyway, I'm not reporting on this now on the slide, but I ran the test, the non-parametric t-test of this, and all of it seems to be significantly different. But but the statistician might say, you're not allowed to say this because the assumptions were not met. This is like technical jargon. You decide what you want to see in this data. You can see that they're the same, or you can see that they're different. Visually, they look like there's some level of difference there. And then Tracy, you remember, was asking the highly sensitive people a bunch of questions on a Likert scale about their career, and he went through the questions, and these were the questions, and people had to say whether they agreed, disagreed, strongly agreed, whatever. And he assigned dynamisms with them, and he kind of computed how many of the 1,000 plus participants agreed with that statement and how many strongly agreed. So, for example, I have 3 slides of this, so I'll run through a few and I'll stay quiet for a while. You can read the other ones because it's going to be tedious otherwise. So, for example, I have left positions in the past due to negative co-workers or superiors. He assigned this dynamism to it, and this is, of course, as he was saying, subject to interpretation. Some different people might see different things in there. Nevertheless, you've got 70% of the population of highly sensitive people who identified with that statement. So what I'll do is just point out that there's a variety of dynamisms that could be linked to these statements. And if you look at the percentages, we're looking at quite high percentages of the whole population. So it looks like that your highly sensitive person are good candidates to have a bunch of dynamisms. What they do with them, of course, as we heard this morning, TPD has 3 levels. Just because you're showing one dynamism doesn't mean anything in itself, right? So we'll keep that in mind. I'm going to leave you to read these statements, and if any of you disagree strongly, you can let me know later, and so that you have the time to match the statement and the dynamism. Give you the next slide, which again shows relatively high levels. If you add them up, that you're looking at a large proportion of the population. I'll let you read those and those. And then we've got the next part of the study. He had a qualitative part in which he sat down with some people, 70 people, and had some structured interviews. And he's reporting on some dynamisms from those interviews. He found in the 70 people, fair few that displayed education of oneself. About 50% of them showed sign of autopsychotherapy. Self-control was present in about 75% of the respondents, and autonomy in 90%. So many report not only feeling different, but feeling compelled to enact more complex way of being outside the dominant culture. So that was the dynamisms 4, level 4, and here he has picked empathy as a level 5 dynamism in about 70%, strongly in 100% of the participants, but only about 50% of them were really focused on others. So I don't know, empathy, I would have thought is focused on others, not necessarily on yourself, but I'm not sure. And yeah, likely engage in protecting themselves from overstimulation. So yeah, maybe as a highly sensitive person, you can have empathy with yourself and try to avoid overstimulation. Creative instinct. 75% of them self-identified as creative. He would like to point out that creativity in theory of positive disintegration has a role to play in a disintegrative process, and has to do with self-perfection instinct, and it seems that it was present in about 25% of the 70 participants. Authenticism, 50% of them seem to show that dynamism. So in conclusion, taken together, the evidence of the 3 different data sets show that there's some level 3, 4, and 5 dynamisms in highly sensitive people, which fits quite nicely with the results I showed yesterday, which are much less, much smaller group, but it seems that the conclusions are similar, and that highly sensitive people probably have a deeply involvement in multi-level personality development. We should do more research and specifically assess the dynamisms, since my study and his study, I think, are the first one to do that with highly sensitive, with combining with highly sensitive person scale. And he noted strong empathy that from highly sensitive people directed towards outward orientation, altruistic, and producing powerful changes. Maybe working towards greater equality, peace, and compassion in at least 50% of the highly sensitive people, and that combined with the profession, you might find that we'll see what comes out of his survey in the end. And if you want to follow what he's doing, he's going to write a book about this, so keep an eye on he's already has one out called Thrive. Tracy Cooper, PhD, on highly sensitive people, called Thrive, and then he's going to write one up about the work on highly sensitive people. I'm sure that we will probably find that highly sensitive people are great value in professions such as maybe nursing or counseling, as long as they can protect themselves from overstimulation and over-empathy or something like that. So a creative drive can potentially lead to higher level personality development, and Tracy wants to make the point that there might be some cultural confusion over the definition and role of creativity, because maybe we need a broader definition of creativity, because currently it's predominantly linked to the production or the end product and performance, like having a novel, new and useful product, as opposed to a process of internal process of personality development. Highly sensitive people seem to have a rich inner milieu with deep introspection, reflection, and commitment to development, which would be your third factor probably. And it seems to distinguish highly sensitive people from the rest. And Tracy says that in our society, which is predominantly oriented towards the external focus, highly sensitive people may have something to bring, some richness that to bring to society as a whole. So that's it for me, and I think we might have time for questions. Yeah. Good.
What was the occupation? What occupation were they doing?
That would be a difficult question.
It's all in the spreadsheet. We didn't process it for this. There's a range of professions up. There's 1,000+ entries, so I don't have any.
So there were varieties.
Variety, yeah. We didn't process this for this.
Age?
Oh, yeah. The same
Yeah,
person
also
age.
a range of age, but not children, I don't think.
Adults, yeah?
Yeah,
How, give me some idea of the range.
I think we're talking 18 to 84 or something like that. What is your point? What?
Well, younger people aren't going to be, you can, but some of those dynamisms that they're picking up are awfully high level. And one wonders about that.
Yeah, so I remember Nancy saying yesterday, we looked hard for people with such high level dynamisms and we just simply don't find them. And here I am talking of highly sensitive people that just scored 3 and 4s. But I mean, I don't think, personality development is not an ontogenic process, or it's not related
That's
to age.
True. That's true.
So that Dabrowski says that quite clear, I think.
But it is related to experience to some extent.
Yeah, so, okay, so what we're going to do is make sure this data set is mined properly. This one, it was mined just for this conference, looking at dynamisms, but he has the data. We can answer that question. Yeah.
So I belonged to a highly sensitive group for over a year, and we met once a week and we talked about us, and we would go around in this group and then we would express what we're doing about our high sensitivity, okay? And I was going through the process of grieving over the loss of my wife. But I was doing things, and in fact my reason for being here is to present the things I did. But they reacted negatively to my doing of these things.
Do you with rich people? But all highly sensitive people did?
Yes, what they end up doing, there's a psychotherapist that headed up this group. One woman got there and says, "Do you agree with what Barry's doing?" And when that happened, I dropped out of it because I felt I was being judged for what my process. So I dropped out. But I'm just trying to understand. They all wanted to sit around and complain, but they didn't want to do anything about it. That was what's going on there? And is it because I'm gifted and this is not a gifted? I don't know. I'm trying to understand.
So the thing about the highly sensitive research for Finlay and Aaron, that is quite remarkable compared to other.
I took that test and I was 28 on it. Okay, so you can understand that.
28 on a 27 item
Well,
scale?
all of them. I was high on all of them.
You're scoring above the scale? That's really
Right.
good. You must be gifted.
Whatever I do.
So basically what is so remarkable about the research from Elaine Aaron is that since she's brought up her book, that is for any person can read that, it's not scientifically written. There has been a lot of spontaneous group starting of highly sensitive people everywhere, anywhere, and there's a big following of that. And of course, depending on that, how that happens, you're putting a lot of sensitive people together, so all the processes, everything that happens there is going to be, is going to be more sensitively taken and more. So it's not because two people are highly sensitive that they absolutely get along. It's just like saying non-highly sensitive people will not get along with the highly sensitive people. It all has to do with other factors as well. So, but the thing is that she says quite clearly is that you can be highly sensitive and introvert, and that's about 70% of the highly sensitive people are introvert. That's why in the past, we mixed up between being shy and neurotic and sensitive. It was all in one packet. Now she's factored it all out, so about the 20% of the population, out of that, there should be about 70% who are introvert, and the rest, about 30%, would be extrovert. Then there's the other construct of sensation seeking, which is somebody who likes novelty, and we don't have a measure on this, but there will be some highly sensitive people who are sensation seekers and some who are not. So knowing that, it could be that you've got a different profile to the people who were there, and there was some level of discontentment and lack of understanding. So you can be a highly sensitive person who likes novelty. So you'll be seeking new situations all the time, and then you don't know why, but you find yourself completely exhausted and you have to retreat 2 days in some quiet place to recoup. So that's completely, it fits the picture quite nicely. And the highly sensitive people who are also sensation seekers, they seem to operate like a non-sensitive, highly sensitive person. So they don't necessarily identify with that, and until they realize that highly sensitive and sensation seeker can be together, you can have both, in which case, most of the time you behave just like a non-highly sensitive person, except that you pay the price for it later. That's the difference.
That was so can I just follow, I don't want to belabor this, but I did notice that Linda in her presentation, they said that one of the characteristics of giftedness is openness to experience. Okay? And I have that. What I'm suggesting is these other people did not have that. And that was, I saw was what they disliked it when I started bringing, I tried this, I tried that, and this.
I think you will find highly sensitive people with openness to experience that are not gifted also. I don't think that you can say that all
but
highly
you're suggesting
sensitive.
it's because I'm an extrovert, that made me.
There might be, I think there's a combination of factors there, and I think that also the research is not far enough to really sort out all these things exactly. At the end of the day, I think in the highly sensitive groups, some people might be under the impression that they come to an extra safe place and they go overboard with expressing themselves and get really disappointed because it's not received in the way they're expecting, and you'll have that risk more because they're more vulnerable in those groups, and if it's not managed properly, then you might get really disappointed people. But the beauty of it is that there are groups, that there are people. It's amazing how you've got this movement, in so many countries of people who identify with that. So there's a side of the literature that says, this is all silly, there's nothing, it's all neurotism, there's nothing else there. It's been factored out, but no, that's not valid, it's just basic neurotism. So, as far as I'm concerned, if a person can identify with that, finds a positive link to that, and in the teaching I've been doing about highly sensitive people, giftedness and Dabrowskian theory to my participants, I see that there's a lot of solace that can be had from knowing the theory of highly sensitive people, of knowing the theory of positive disintegration and kind of finding your way there. And having a way to reframe your perceptions and then trying to make smarter decisions about how you behave according to this new framework that you're suddenly aware of. So that's the beauty, I think, of the highly sensitive construct, is that it seems to improve people's life a lot. And I would say that the theory of positive disintegration has the same effect. I found a lot of people say to me how they're now at peace because they have understood that maybe if they've got a friend who seems to have disintegration processes, it actually could be really helpful to help them because they're on their way somewhere, as opposed to trying to change friends who are maybe a level 1 friend who will never move from there. And there's also a gained respect from, that's where you are, and it's okay to be there. There's no, it gives some understanding of the highly sensitive person towards others, because if they're allowed to be where they are, then others are also allowed to be where they are, and they don't need to be changed or something. So anyway, that's my experience from the group I've been teaching.
You will give references for the functional MRIs?
Yes, I can give you, I don't have them right now. Yeah, they will be all on Elaine Aron's site. She has, and if you want, I can give it to you later. Show you the page, yeah. I didn't put the references back here. There's 3 studies that's very interesting. The first one is about processing signal, the visual signal. So there's differences there. The second one is about looking at culture, the impact of culture in interpreting a situation. Turns out that an Asian culture, the interpretation of through an Asian culture of one situation and the interpretation of the same situation by a Western mind, for highly sensitive people, it turns out that culture is not separating the 2 highly sensitive people. Whether they're from that culture or that culture, they activate the same way. As opposed to those who are not highly sensitive, they they activate differently according to their culture. So that might be the reason why this group of, that you kind of feel like a kindred kind of connection to other highly sensitive people if you're one, maybe.
What was the third one?
And the third one is Acevedo, who was looking at empathy and looking at the activation for empathy and where it was. First of all, in the brain, she's looking at one place it wasn't there, and then they found the activation in certain brain parts, which I forget the name of, and highly sensitive people were activating more than.
They find that on the gray matter or on the white matter?
Oh, I'm trying to remember the name of that.
Was it one of the
I think it was.
Seculars?
I don't want to say something wrong. I'll show it to you later. They've got the scans there. I could have brought the picture, but this was about Dabrowski, not about yeah. Any other question or comment?
I'm just wondering, maybe you've talked about this already, or people already know, but the HSP community, how do they tend to respond to OEs, to Dabrowski? Do they see it as like redundant or?
They don't know.
They don't know anything
Only the people who have come to my course I force them into it because I give a course on highly sensitive people. I've done that several times, and I kind of force them into the course number 6 because I do highly sensitive on different types, like on health, on children and your own child that you were, the work, the health, and then I do one of the session is about the theory of positive disintegration by Dabrowski. And the reaction of my participants, that's all I can talk about. They were quite, so once they knew about this, I used to get some feedback email and said, thank you so much for bringing Dabrowski to my life because I met a level 1 and I know not to bother now. Something like this, like I keep my energy for something else, and things like. And then there was the other side that some people thought it was elitist, and that it was a distasteful proposition that these people who have overexcitability should be better than others, but that's, I said again, it's not because you have overexcitability, is that that's the first factor, you've got another 2 to contend with to lead to personality development, so it's not what we're saying, but still that's how it was received. And this, that was one person in, I taught this 6 times 17 to 20 participants, so there was one in all these participants that said, didn't like it one bit. So.
Does Tracy have a website?
Yes, it does. Should have put it there, shouldn't I? Well, we can either look for it now for everybody, or if we connect it to the... If you go to Tracy Cooper, PhD. Oh, he might have put it in his description, yeah.
DrTracyCooper.com.
Good, thank you.
Yes, he also has a Twitter, if anybody's interested to hear what he has to say. He's on Twitter as well. Yeah. Any other brilliant thoughts?
No, it's nice. It's a very nice study, and those are significant differences.
Oh, the master
They
has
are
spoken.
I know. Yeah. I told Tracy you need to publish this in a scholarly paper before you write your book.
Yeah.
So if only I can bring back that home to him. Tracy, if you're listening to us on video after this session, did you hear this? Publish first, write your book after. Right.
It'll get hidden in a book. That's the problem, and it's a broader range.
I think it's a significant contribution with a good sample size with some interesting results. So.
And it needs to be a jury journal.
Right.
Because that Gifted Child Quarterly article that I read, your chapter was knocked in Sal's book because it was published in a book instead of in a scholarly journal, peer reviewed.
Yeah, that's the only currency that researchers work with. And he's better off doing that and then citing himself in his book
Yes.
rather than doing the other way around.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and it gets him in Google,
Yeah.
so Google scholarly articles.
Yes.